Grant Barclay, number 188. Moderator, I present the report of the Legal Questions Committee, which is found in section 4 of the Blue Book. The chief piece of work offered by the committee is the revision of the Church Courts Act. The text is found in Appendix B. This seeks to be more than a consolidation of existing law. It also offers a broad understanding of the roles of each of the three church courts and the interactions among them. As far as possible, it uses language which doesn't require legal knowledge in order to understand its provisions. It points to, rather than repeats, other legislative material, and it endeavours to be reasonably comprehensive in addressing matters specifically relating to the courts of the Church. The committee hopes this is a practically useful tool, principally for session and presbytery clerks, as well as for others. It largely restates the law, but makes slight innovations in the following areas. First, provisions are made to enable eldership obligations to be relinquished in the event of a lack of capacity, and there is clarification that standing apologies for absence from session meetings may be accepted. Second, it is proposed that membership of a presbytery need not require an elder who is otherwise in good standing to be a member of a kirk session within its boundaries. And thirdly, delegation of authority, not itself considered innovative, is described in detail, which has not previously been included in legislation. No change to the minimum age of eldership is proposed, given the potentially significant trustee and other obligations placed on elders, which the committee considers are not appropriate for those who have not attained majority. In this, the Church seeks to implement the general principle of empowerment at age 16, but protection to age 18. Correspondence, however, may be of any age, and this may provide a route for greater engagement with people of all ages. A novel procedural proposal, however, is that this draft act should not be sent down under the Barrier Act. It is rather offered to the Church for consultation in draft form during the coming year. Suggestions for improvement and clarification are welcome, and the committee will present a fresh and final draft next year. Legal Questions considers there is little of an innovative nature which is significant in this proposed act. The committee believes an invitation to consider and discuss its terms is preferable to the Barrier Act's binary vote by presbyteries, either to approve or disapprove, coupled with a more limited opportunity to comment. This approach is, however, simply proposed. If this Assembly considers it more appropriate to send the draft down under the Barrier Act, all materials have been prepared and a suitable overture shall swiftly, I am assured, be provided. The past challenging years, about which we have heard this morning already, have taught us that flexibility is vital, and I hope the Assembly sees in this proposal a desire to learn from experience whilst not insisting upon novelty for its own sake. Presbytery review has not developed as swiftly as some might have anticipated, partly due to the pandemic and also the continuing widespread presbytery restructuring. We need continually to review our practices, not merely to improve, but also to encourage, to congratulate, as well as challenge and correct. The outline of a possible peer-resourced review process for the new, larger presbyteries distills thinking to date and shall, it is hoped, be further refined through consultation in the coming year. High-level comments are welcome. Proposed changes to appeals procedures aim to balance the interests of appellants with the resource demands of addressing grounds of appeal which are incompetent or irrelevant. It grants powers to the convener and vice-convener of the committee or commission to dismiss those grounds of appeal which are incompetent or irrelevant. It is also proposed that the judicial panel pool be widened to permit the Church to benefit from wider relevant experience. Recent experience has informed proposed changes to the Commission of Assembly Act to permit changes to the format of a subsequent General Assembly where circumstances demand, and for the Commission itself to meet in a range of formats. The proposed Church Courts Act permits but does not oblige Kirk Sessions, presbyteries and the Assembly itself to meet in a variety of formats. The task of legal questions is simply to make possible these formats of meeting. The General Assembly itself has yet to debate the potential benefits as well as the disadvantages of online or mixed format as opposed to fully in-person meetings. Indeed, a hybrid pattern of meeting could also be achieved through a sequence over time of wholly in-person and wholly online meetings. Important issues such as fellowship and encounter, sharing in worship, adequate scrutiny of proposals, and ensuring sufficient engagement in debate are all essential elements of any General Assembly, as is the value of the prominence given to the Church's work achieved through a large gathering. Permissive or enabling legislation demands careful consideration of the principles which inform and the consequences which may flow from any change of practice. Directions which come from this Assembly shall be incorporated in the developing draft of the Church Courts Act and in the provisions for calling the next General Assembly in 2023. I underline the need for all Kirk Sessions to adopt a conflict of interest policy. A style is being made available on the Church website, and I thank the Solicitor and Law Department for their work in this and other significant areas of the committee's remit. The report notes that this has been a busy year, something I would underline. I simply wish to acknowledge the committee's gratitude to the Principal and Depute Clerks who have met with efficiency and good grace both this demanding workload and the need to operate under challenging circumstances through pandemic restrictions. The Principal Clerk serves as Secretary to the Legal Questions Committee. While he does far more than that, and, as we learned this morning, Moderator, makes new friends in the process, his advice, experience, insight, and ability to explain facets of church law and practice have been of singular benefit to the committee in its work over this past year. It would be hard to imagine how legislation concerning registration of ministry, discipline, same-sex marriage, mission planning, church courts, and much more would be developed without the insight and input of the Principal and Depute Clerks. The frequent engagement with Scottish Government officials over the pandemic period and the early dissemination of information to ministers and Kirk Sessions has been invaluable, and I thank all those involved in this uniquely challenging task. Moderator, more shall be said later in this Assembly as the Reverend Fiona Smith formally takes up the role of Principal Clerk. At this point, I simply wish to offer the sincere thanks of the Legal Questions Committee to the Reverend Dr. George White for his leadership, guidance, encouragement and good humour over his period of service. We wish Moira and George enrichment and joy in the years to come. And so I present the report and move the deliverance, sections 1 and 3, but not the final section, Moderator.
Seconded. I have two people standing by for questions. Derek Lawson, number 541, and we speak now, and would Paul Middleton, 533, stand by.
Thank you, Moderator. Derek Lawson, 541. My question has to some extent been answered by speaking with the convener of Legal Questions Committee before we began this morning. It was simply, or it was one of three questions. now reduced to one. And that is to ask that the committee take up consideration of how presbytery review is to be facilitated within the International Presbytery and the Presbytery of England and the Channel Islands. Those who have read Appendix C will see that we are effectively excluded from the Scottish arrangement, and quite rightly, we are different. And I simply seek an assurance that this will be looked at by the Legal Questions Committee.
Moderator, if I may simply say I'm most grateful to Mr Lawson for the very helpful conversation earlier, which could only have been bettered if he'd bought me a coffee while he was speaking. That apart, he's absolutely correct. Presbytery review matters. However, the Presbytery of International Charges and England and the Channel Islands are necessarily different, and I hope that he and the Assembly might hear my assurance that in this ongoing work we shall recognise both these differences and the need for appropriate review of these presbyteries also.
Thank you. Paul Middleton.
Thank you, Moderator. Middleton 533, and I also want to thank the convener and the clerk for a lengthy conversation, and I didn't realise neither of us were buying you a coffee, so apologies for that. Following the Act on Same-Sex Marriages, we don't think there is a problem in England and the Channel Islands. I'm currently moderator of that presbytery, and I just want to ask this question publicly so the clerk knows I've done what I said I would do. But just to ensure that the legalities are there, does the convener have any advice for us, or indeed the procurator, on how we might make sure that the permission is also applied to presbyteries beyond Scotland?
Moderator, this is a technical legal matter, and I do feel it may better be addressed by the procurator.
Okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Moderator. Technical and legal it may be, but a further constraint is that I only know about Scots law. Get my defence in early. Mr Middleton has asked about these matters before, and I have suggested that if he wants to find out the position about solemnising a legally valid marriage in England, he might want to look at the excellent consultation paper on solemnisation of marriage, which was produced by the English and Welsh Law Commission and published as recently as September 2020. It's available on the internet. But in short, we don't see any difficulty with a Church of Scotland minister solemnising a same-sex marriage in another jurisdiction, but we cannot give advice as to whether or not that would be legally valid. So investigation of the position locally is always going to be required.
Thank you. We move to, well, are there any further questions for the convener? Nope. Okay, well, we move to the report. And to receiving the report, I have got two people down here, or at least they're not showing though. The ones we've had, is that it, right? Okay. Okay. Number one, receive the report. Number two. Sorry.
They've already spoken, might deal with the questioners. So, tell me about the Zoom hands.
We're okay.
Yep.
Number two.
We've done number two already.
We didn't Saturday. Number three. I have Sarah Ross, 262, wishing to speak. Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah Ross, number 262. It was a question and a comment combined, so I went for here. It was to do with the Church Courts Act under the Kirk Session 3.1.3, pastoral and spiritual care. I was just looking for a little bit of clarity on this. It says exercise supervision over the pastoral and spiritual care of the whole congregation throughout the whole of life. I've always been under the understanding the Kirk Session also had that for the whole of the parish, and I have used that line to my session to remind them that we're not just here for the members. So I just really wanted to ask if that's somewhere else and I've missed it, which is highly possible, or if, yeah, just that's my question really. Thank you.
Moderator, if I may say so, Sarah Gross puts perfectly into practice the hope of the Legal Questions Committee, which is that through conversation and constructive criticism, the next draft of the Church Courts Act, which next year's Assembly sees, will be better than the one which was presented to you. And so I'm very grateful to Sarah Ross for raising that quite important point, which I do take and think we ought to include, and just hope that she might email that to me or to someone in order that that matter might not be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Number 3. Hands okay, right. Now we have a new 4. And Professor Kerrigan's going to speak to it.
Can you hear me, moderator?
Yes, we can.
Moderator, the new section which I propose I can speak to very briefly because I've had discussions with the convener and also by email communication with the Faith and Nurture convener, and I understand that this motion is acceptable. It's, I think, very important that as readers play a greater part in the life of the church as things develop, that there is the opportunity for them to conduct marriage ceremonies. Theologically, I don't understand there to be any difficulty since it isn't a sacrament, but there are various questions which will require to be looked at, and thus I make the motion in the terms. My friend, Dr. David Coulter, is happy to second.
David? Yep.
Moderator David Coulter, 335. I often say to couples that there's nothing more complicated in this world than marriage law. And I think it'd be really helpful, given where we are with our presbytery mission planning and the shortage of ministers and the available people who we rely upon to support our churches and our congregations, to allow readers to officiate at marriage would be really helpful. And I would certainly support Professor Kerrigan in the suggestion, Moderator.
Thank you, David.
And Moderator, I'm happy to accept.
Is the General Assembly happy to accept? Online. Okay, the new 4 carries. No, we've got to deal with 4 first. Back to print.
Yeah, yes, we're back to the print moderator. We've had a potential motion as a new number 4, and it's not being published, so we can move from there.
We move to 4 as in print, and there are a number of people wishing to speak to this. First of all, Marjorie McLean, 525, and would Peter Johnson, 422, stand by to speak?
Thank you. Moderator Marjorie McLean, Commissioner 525, Minister of South Ronaldsay and Barry in Orkney. If the committee reviews this legislation, I imagine its biggest decision will be whether to maintain the traditionalist position as the Church's default attitude, or to change that default to the affirming position now held by a majority, or perhaps remove entirely the need to have a default position at all. And without wishing to open that review here, I merely wish to be assured by the convener that the third of those options will from the outset be amongst the outcomes the committee will consider. To have a default position in either direction means those otherwise minded are compelled to take a stance against an official stance of the Church, to depart from some kind of doctrinal expectation, even if only a cultural one. And that articulation of our constrained difference causes pain to traditionalists who grieve that an alternative position they abhor is even permitted, who feel their integrity is hurt by having to share ecclesial space with those whose belief on this offends them. Their hurt is of a very different kind from the hurt caused by the Church's default position to its LGBTQ ministers and deacons, for some of whom the possibilities of marriage or partnership have been constrained, for some long delayed, for some forfeited. It is a very high price to pay for someone else's legitimate belief, which you don't share, to be the default. It is time to stop hurting each other. I hope we move away from default positions on this entirely and instead use, indeed rejoice in, our historic freedom of individual belief, behaviour and integrity. Thank you.
Are you wishing to respond to that?
Moderator, simply to say that I would encourage the switched on Dr McLean that the review shall assume no preferred position, but shall, as she rightly hopes, be one of a number which shall be included in proposals which may be discussed at next year's General Assembly.
Thank you. Peter Johnson, and then would Alistair Cook, number 95, please stand by.
Johnston 422. Moderator, much though I love it when the Presbytery clerk gets on the phone and asks if you want to be the interim moderator somewhere, I I've been aware over the last few years that the legislation as it is written at the moment means that those who are in same-sex marriage or civil partnerships cannot be interim moderators. Now, that is an important and a valuable part of our ministries, and there is an injustice issue at the moment, a matter of fairness, indeed, between us all, that this situation has arisen. So can I ask if the convener that will be looked at and remedied in the new proposals? Thank you, Moderator.
Moderator, I'm happy to confirm that indeed, among a number of issues, shall indeed be part of the review.
Thank you. Alistair, and would Mike Weaver, number 347, please stand by?
Thank you, Moderator. Alistair Cook, 95. I was going to ask a question before I heard these last two contributions, just to ask what the scope of this review was going to be. What were the areas of concern that were going to be covered? But I now see it's effectively going to be a reopening of the whole discussion about what our position is as a Church of Scotland. And what I said in my last contribution in the last debate about us effectively agreeing same-sex marriage comes very much to the front of my mind in all this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike? You're not switched on, Mike. That's you.
Mike Weaver, 347, Minister of Gillespie Memorial Church in Dunfermline. I think, like Alistair, the two previous questions, especially Marjorie's, sets out the scope, because I was going to ask her what the purpose was of the review. But I would note it says about experience will be taken into account. What experience will inform the review? How will that experience or the data of experience be gathered? And how will the committee ensure there's no bias in gathering that experience? I'm not quite sure what experience is meant. For clarification, under 4.2, it says it hasn't been considered since amended in 2016 to incorporate changes to civil law, and proposes, in consultation with Faith and Religious Forum, Theological Forum, to undertake a review of this Act in light of experience. I'm just wondering, in light of what experience? And maybe a supplementary question, what changes to civil law are going to be incorporated?
Moderator, I'm not entirely sure what changes to civil law are anticipated. Off the top of my head, I can think of none. My understanding is that the experience being referred to is the experience of having used the Act over these number of years. Some matters have come to light. The committee is simply seeking an instruction from the General Assembly to review the Act and its operation, to bring proposals back to next year's Assembly in the light of the reflections on those. I am sorry too that I am unable at this stage to explain fully the methodology which may be used. I would like to think that, as Legal Questions has in the past, been studiously careful to be neutral in all of this, but to recognise that we are operating within a constrained difference where a range of views are rightly held and expressed, that the Assembly would hear me say that we shall continue to use that kind of effort and remain studiously neutral.
Thank you, Convener. We move then to number 4 as in print. Does the General Assembly accept it? We're okay with that in line as well. We're moving to number 5, but we have 2 amendments to number 5. The first amendment is in the name of
just to explain, Mother, we're just considering that there are two motions put in, both describe themselves as amendments, but they would cut across each other, and we have to think of a way of giving the Assembly and indeed the Commissioners the right to hear what's being suggested, but also a process by which you can make a decision.
Thank you.
Moderator, rather than the dull watch of seeing us discuss procedural matters, I wonder if it might be the will of the Assembly to see a short video from one of our presbyteries, and we'll come back right away with the way of dealing with this.
Would the Assembly come to order, please? Right, the clerk's going to explain to us what's happening.
I thought you were going to say clerk's going to explain how to vote. We had two A5, one A52 in the hub. One is an amendment in the name of Eleanor McMahon, which asks the committee to bring principles for Presbytery review to next year's Assembly and on the way to an act in 2024. Derek Lawson has suggested bringing the legislation next year, but he's now content to see principles next year and is willing to withdraw his amendment. So we have an amendment to the section in print in the name of the committee, number 5, and Eleanor McMahon is going to propose an amendment, and it is my understanding that Dr Bartley, generous as ever, is willing to accept the amendment if the Assembly are willing to accept.
He would be willing to accept it.
Well, we'll hear the amendment. Eleanor, would you like to speak to it, please?
Eleanor McMahon, 102. I won't take up any more time except I propose this, and I understand that the convener is happy to accept.
Can you see it on screen?
Yes, Moderator, and then in that case I'll read it. So it's amend section 5 by adding after the words Presbytery review, the words bringing the principles of Presbytery review to the General Assembly of 2023 for approval before bringing. And then delete the words and to bring, so that it reads, the whole thing would read then, instruct the committee to continue with the development of Presbytery review, bringing the principles of Presbytery review to the General Assembly of 2023 for approval, before bringing a Presbytery Review Act to the General Assembly of 2024.
Are the conveners happy to accept that?
It should be formally seconded.
Seconded.
Right, there we are.
The General Assembly happy to accept and receive that?
Just wait for my hands.
Are we online?
That's fine.
Online's fine as well. That's good. Right, we're moving now to 5 as in print, and I have Brian Hillsley who wishes to speak to number 65.
No.
No, we're not.
We need to do 5 as amended. No, we've just approved the amendment. Moderator, I'm sorry to be difficult, even to my colleagues I'm difficult now, and it is time I left. We've amended number 5, and that's what's now before us.
Yes.
As I understand it, according to this screen, Brian Hillsley wants to speak to the amended number 5 before we approve it.
Yes. Brian?
Thank you, Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Brian.
Thank you, Moderator. Once upon a time in the dim and the distant past, I obtained a law degree and I practiced as a solicitor. So I understand the importance of law in any civilized society and of regulation in any institution. And I also want to say that I recognize and truly appreciate the work of the convener and of the Legal Questions Committee in these challenging times. That said, I want to ask the Assembly to stop and to think before authorising the committee to continue in this trajectory towards establishing into church law a process for presbytery review. Adding yet another piece of legislation to, it seems to me, an ever-increasing list of legislation which is also, it seems to me, ever-increasing in length and complexity. Every single piece of church legislation needs to be read, it needs to be interpreted, and it needs to be implemented by presbyteries and by congregations across the land. In today's world, there is an ever-increasing amount of state legislation and regulation which requires to be digested and implemented by Kirk sessions and presbyteries. Much of that legislation, and I think of things such as health and safety, safeguarding, charity regulation, much of that legislation being difficult and onerous. And the question I want to ask is, do we really need more legislation? And I suggest that we do not. Running through every dimension of our thinking across the Kirk in these current days is the recognized need to give absolute priority to what is rightly described as the frontline work of the church, which work lies in the parishes. it is accepted that that work is under-resourced and that it is also extremely challenging in today's world. All hands are required on deck in the ship that is the parish church. Fundamental to our Presbyterian system is the fact that the vast majority, if not all, of those who populate the higher courts of the church and the committees of these courts, all of these people are at source office bearers in a front-line congregation. Every moment of time and every ounce of energy which those office bearers are asked to give in the work of presbytery, of General Assembly, and of their constituent committees is a moment of time and an ounce of energy which they cannot give to their own congregation. Added to that is the reality that functioning at presbytery or General Assembly also involves monetary cost to the church, which money is, of course, often money that is given sacrificially by faithful members. In asking us not only to add yet another statute to church law, but yet another standing committee to the General Assembly, the committee in its report cites the opinion of some in the focus group of presbyteries that this process of presbytery review is not only desirable, but essential. The dictionary definition, moderator, of the word essential is absolutely necessary, extremely important. And I want, with all due respect to everyone involved, to suggest that the act that is anticipated by this trajectory of work by the Legal Questions Committee and the processes which would follow from it are neither absolutely necessary or extremely important. And I therefore want to invite the Assembly now to give some thoughtful consideration to these points, and I would urge the Assembly to call a halt to this work. In doing so, we will not only save vital resources, time, energy, and money for far more important work, but we will also demonstrate faith in our presbyteries. Presbyteries, let us remember, who are going through extraordinary degree of change at this time. And we will also show, moderator, the conviction that our presbyteries are perfectly capable of functioning faithfully and effectively without such centralized, expensive, and bureaucratic oversight. Thank you, moderator.
Brian, thank you. I've got Eleanor McMahon, number 102, wishing to speak. Eleanor.
Eleanor McMahon, 102. Moderator, I think this is a very important piece of promise legislation, which is much needed within our congregations and within our presbyteries and within our church as a whole. I hear what Mr Hillsley is saying about the pain, etc., etc. I'm an interim minister, I have been so for 12 years. I meet pain every time I go into a new interim ministry placement, when governance has gone wrong, when the processes have gone wrong, when people have gone awry in their ministries, both locally and at presbytery level, and it is painful. We need presbyteries to be reviewed in the way as outlined. So far, we need to hear more, which is why I brought my amendment. And so I would urge the General Assembly to accept this motion.
Now we're dealing with 5 as amended, and we're going to vote on it. Sorry.
Moderator, I would simply say 2 things. One is that legislation compels, and that's not always a bad thing. as the presbyteries form, it may be attractive to put the business of review on the back burner, but it may be that the very time when presbyteries need to review their practices is when they are developing these practices, and there is the possibility of learning from one another. So the compulsion element of legislation is not without its benefit. And the other issue is that it coordinates. If there were some kind of framework which every presbytery were to use, there is a greater likelihood of insight being able to be garnered and then shared across the presbyteries. I've no particular beef with this matter at all, but I am supporting it, particularly since 2024 means that it will be presented by my successor as convener.
That's naughty, Grant. Okay. Number 5, as amended, we move to vote. Can you explain the vote?
Yes, we need to vote electronically since someone's moved the negative and asked us to reject this. So we would vote. 1 is for the section as in the print, and 2 would be against. That's using a Bluetooth handset, and on the hub, for and against buttons. Susan.
The voting is now open. Ten seconds. And the voting is closed.
There are those for 297 and against 63. Carries.
Inclined to that we break for lunch at this point, but I think we have to go for a bit. We're at number 6 at the print.
Nobody want to speak this morning?
No one want to speak? Does the Assembly approve?
Thanks. This one's.
Thank you. It's also a dresser, yeah.
So, number 6 in the print, Mother.
6 in the print, approved.
Will you just give me a second to see the Zoom hands? That's fine.
Right. Number 7. Number 8.
Wait, my Zoom hands. Right, okay, number 8 now.
Number 8. Number 9.
Yes, good.
Yeah. Number 10. Number 11. Number 12.
Yeah. Okay, number 11. Number 11.
Number 11. Number 12.
Let's put number 11.
Number 11.
Well, if people indicate, if they could indicate their approval for number 11, please.
Okay. Number 12. And number 13. I told you.
Thank you. There's a new section 14.
Oh, there is a new section 14. Knew it would go.
Who's doing this?
Who's?
In the name of Conor McFadgen. Conor McFadgen.
In the name of Conor McFadgen, number...
There he is. Up here, moderator.
Thank you, Conor.
Thank you, Moderator. Conor McFadgen, number 74. I'll try and keep this brief. I'm simply moving, hopefully, an uncontentional new section of deliverance to instruct the Legal Questions Committee in consultation with the Faith Nurture Forum to review Standing Order 35 on youth representatives in light of the General Assembly and presbytery reforms and bring proposals as to an amended Standing Order 35 to the General Assembly of 23.
Do you want to read it?
He's just read it,
Oh, he just read it, okay. Good. Seconded? Yeah.
And the convener is willing to...
And I understand the convener is happy to accept this. Is the Assembly happy? Thank you.
Enough hands as a two.
Moderator, I'm not moving section D, the deliverance as a whole, in order to keep matters open until Wednesday. I believe that to be correct.
Indeed, moderator, there have been 2 amendments offered to the Solemnisation of Same-Sex Marriage Act, and clearly the overture process demanded that we pass the Act as it has been considered by the presbyteries. We have now done that, and in fairness to those who have moved at this late stage, a couple of amendments only this morning. We have not had time really to consider them properly, but we're keeping the Legal Questions Committee business open until the last bit of business on Wednesday, and we will possibly return to the Same-Sex Marriage Act at that point and consider those amendments that have been put to us if we feel they are competent. So we are not doing the deliverance as a whole at the moment, moderator, but we can break for lunch.
Thank you very much. Well,
just a point of order.
Peter.
Johnston 422. So, sorry, there's a bit of confusion up at our neck of the woods there. So does that mean have we approved the section 4 that we've gone through or not? Because I thought we had approved it. So there's just a bit of confusion as what has just been said there about the amendments. If there's some clarity, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
What's section 4?
Do you want to?
Oh, no, moderator, section 4 is Act 1 2015. We're talking about the Same-Sex Marriage Act that was passed this morning. And there were 2 amendments came in, I would say, quite late in the day, given how long we've been considering it. We need to have a look at them to see what they're like. But in fairness to those who have brought them, we intend to leave the Legal Questions Committee some space, potentially, to look at this with us on Wednesday afternoon at the close of the business that's already set, and that was already agreed this morning in the report of the Procedure Committee that legal questions would return at that stage.
Are you quite happy? Yeah. Is that it?
That's it.
We break for lunch.